Hi everybody. Aaron just recently posted, Azric83 as he's otherwise known, just recently uploaded a video where he was talking about his response or his kind of reaction to the thoughts of random character generation versus character creation, like point buy systems versus random roll systems for generating your character stats or basically just generating the build of your character. And I really advise you, if you're looking at this video, I really advise you to go back and look at his first. So because I'm really just kind of going to kind of build on some of the concepts that he talks about. And so he demonstrates several games, which I think he does an excellent job of showing which games he believes the point buy type of character build system works better for versus which games where a random generation or semi-random or whatever tends to work better for the flow, for the structure of that type of game, for the types of characters that you're playing in those games. And so go back and watch his video, and then come back to me. And I think that's a very good point, and as I said in a comment just moments ago, I don't think that I ever thought about it explicitly in those terms, but it does make a lot of sense to me. When I think about a lot of the games that I enjoy and the way those games approach character creation versus character generation, it seems to make sense. I mean, if you take a game like, say, Spirit of the Century, which is basically where the characters, when they start off the game, they are basically some of the most competent people in the world. I mean, really, the focus of the game, not to get too far into it, is that all of these fantastically talented people are called together because they have some kind of greater purpose. So when you start the game, they're already kind of masters of their element, of whatever it is that they're good at, whatever it is that they like to do. And so, again, in that game, there is virtually no character advancement. I mean, there is a little bit of, there are options for way that characters can be tweaked based on how the story progresses, based on the evolution of the character in terms of the world around them, in terms of the story that's being told. But characters are already incredibly powerful, and so they don't ever really get any more powerful than they begin the game as. Consequently, in one of his examples as well, like a game like Warhammer Fantasy, or one that I'm going to really talk about, which I'm starting to kind of, my synapses are firing in terms of the fact that it's kind of an in-between, for me at least, is the Star Wars role-playing game. So in Warhammer, very much antithetical to Spirit of the Century, you are the grunt. In fact, you might not even be a grunt. You are the bone picker. You are the charcoal burner. You are the gutter cleaner. You are basically just some Joe Schmo off the street who is thrust into a story where he could potentially become a hero, where he could potentially become something more than what he began as. And so those characters are flawed and sometimes incompetent at certain things, and they're not a hero yet, but they could become one. And so again, just to kind of, I don't want to do too much rehashing of what Aaron was talking about, but that makes sense then, in that in terms of, you kind of roll up your guy and you say, okay, well, what kind of a scenario did he come from? And then my duty as the player is to take him from that starting point and drive him towards some, whatever my particular greater goal is, what I want the character to be. And that's part of the challenge, I think. I think that's part of the fun of a game like Warhammer, is that you take your guy from nothing and you see where he can go. You see how far can he leave his humble beginnings behind. One that I did think about, because obviously it's one of my most prominent, favorite, longest lived role playing games, is the Star Wars D6 role playing game. And I started to think about where does it fall in terms of the generation versus creation kind of polar extremes in terms of the tone that it's trying to deliver, because Star Wars D6 is a point by type of system. So in other words, you get X number of points to spend for your character's attributes, you get X number of points to spend on your character's skills, and you can spend them essentially however you want. Now the game comes with a multitude of character templates, which are basic archetypes that you don't have to conform to, but that makes it easier for, like a beginning player or somebody who's struggling for a concept to just jump into a character. So you pick up the smuggler template and you say, I want to be a smuggler, so here's A, B, and C. Here are my attributes for my smuggler. But otherwise, the game is really free form. It's you take the points and you build the character that you want with them. So I started to think about, what does that mean in terms of, or how does that translate then to the fact that I perceive the play style of Star Wars, the D6, as you are not yet the hero, and the game is about that journey. Like Aaron said, is it you are already the hero and you want to continue being the hero, or is it you're not the hero and you're on the journey to become one? And I view Star Wars as one of those journey games where you're not quite the hero, but you want to become the hero. And so that kind of like plays a little against what he's talking about, and what I think I generally agree with his assessment of, in that it's a generation system, and yet I don't think you're intended to start off as the hero already. Well, that started to feed my concepts or my thoughts about character advancement, because again, we used Spirit of the Century as a particular example where your character already is, and so there's not a whole lot of room to grow from there. There's not, you are already a hero, and so you don't have a lot of rules for becoming a hero because you already are one. Well, in Star Wars, you've got a generation system, but you also have an advancement system. But it's a very generally slow and incremental advancement system compared to something like, say, Dungeons and Dragons. And I think that's really the crux of why I still identify Star Wars as a journey game, because your character starts off pretty capable. I mean, they're not the best in the galaxy or anything, but they are more capable than the average person to begin. They are clearly heroic. They are favored by fate, destiny, fortune, the Force, whatever you want to call it, to be something greater. But what I've found is that when I play characters in Star Wars, that I think the journey is about the refinement of the character, in the sense that, let's say I play a smuggler, and I start off with, when I'm creating the character, obviously I kind of build him as a smuggler. He's good at piloting, and he's quick with a blaster, and he's quick with a con, or something like that, right? But I think that the journey of that character is that you start off with this like concept, like this archetype or this stereotype or this basic general idea for who your character is, and the journey of the game then is really about, how is that character kind of forced to change? How is he forced to grow? How does that character evolve in the face of the trials that are placed before him? And the best example of this is probably my favorite player character that I've played in Star Wars games. Of course, I don't get to play nearly as much as I GM, but he's the favorite PC that I've ever run in Star Wars, was a smuggler type. And when I started out with him, he started off as a pretty kind of stereotypical, cliche, kind of not quite Han Solo, but kind of Han Solo, that kind of a thing. And what I found was that the character, as I got to play him, the more I got to play the character, the less like the stereotype he became, the more I developed who he was and how he would react to things and what he wanted for himself and what he thought of himself and what goals he had. What kind of personal developments did the campaign force upon the character, and me as a player, it forced me to evolve my concept of who this guy was. So I don't know, I'm probably not making a whole lot of sense. I get the feeling like I'm really just kind of rambling here, But it struck me instantly as I started to think about that my from my perspective, I think I enjoy the games. I tend to enjoy the games more that are about the journey, whether where I mean, there's a couple of instances where like Mutants and Masterminds. If you're playing superheroes, I feel like you want to start off as the hero. You are exceptional. You are who you want to conceive your character to be. But I enjoy the journey games a lot. I think I kind of generally like the concept of the underdog or the unassuming hero or the hero who doesn't know that he's a hero yet, and about the growth of that character into becoming something more than he thinks of himself. And so I that got me kind of in a brainstorm about Star Wars and how I interpreted that contradiction in those terms, that you're building the character that you want, but I think from my point of view, maybe you think you want that character at the start of the game, and then as you play the game you find out that you want something more, that the character you thought you wanted isn't quite what you really wanted, and or that because of the way the story progresses you want something different. You want your character to grow or change. It's something that just I've personally experienced. So I'd love to hear people's feedback about that. Aaron, I'd love to hear you give some thoughts to that general concept. I tend to enjoy games that have a very slow advancement system, because I really like to see. I like to take the character and watch him grow organically through the story from what I conceive of him as to what he ends up becoming. And sometimes those can be very disparate ideas. But I think you make very excellent points. I think you are dead. I think you're like spot on in that assessment of the purpose maybe of generation, or the value maybe of generation versus creation, and how that influences the gameplay and or even game design, as you pointed out. So yeah, I'm with you on that. I think I definitely get where you're going with that, and I think that whenever I'm thinking of any of the games that I have, I think it totally aligns with that, with one or two minor exceptions, like the Star Wars conundrum. So anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear anybody else's thoughts, and talk to you guys later.